Shalom Aleichem. Welcome. A gute Woche. Ich heiße Vivian Felsen und es ist mein großes Vergnügen, euch zu begrüßen im Namen von Komitee für Yiddish bei der Toronto Yiddische Föderation. My name is Vivian Felsen, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you today on behalf of the Toronto UGA Committee for Yiddish. So please note that although some of the content of today's program is in Yiddish, the presentation itself will be mainly in English. And we're really looking forward to today's very special program. I've had a little preview of some of the things that you're going to see, and it's going to be amazing. But before we begin, I want to thank my colleague and indispensable member of our Committee for Yiddish, Sharon Power, who, as always, is behind the scenes, ensuring that our webinar runs smoothly. Please put any comments or questions you may have into the Q&A box, not the chat box. Sharon will be able to deal with some of your concerns during the course of this program, but our guest speaker will have the opportunity to see your comments and answer your questions after his presentation. Today's program is being co-presented in partnership with the California Institute for Yiddish Culture and Language, the CIYCL, in Los Angeles. Our collaboration on Yiddish programming over the years has been a perfect example of Canada-US cultural collaboration. In fact, Miri Koral, the CEO and founding director of CIYCL, is the organizer of today's event. Miri is a professor at UCLA. She's also a popular Yiddish instructor, a prize-winning bilingual writer, poet, and translator, a theater coach, and much, much more. So I now present to you Miri Koral, who will interview our guest speaker. Miri.
Hartelijk Dank, Vivian, and the Toronto UGA Committee for Yiddish. And thank you to Sharon Power, the committee's technical mavente, for your behind-the-scenes webinar hosting. Both of you and the committee are what make this program possible. So hartelijk Dank. Es ist Tage mein größte Vergnügen, mein größte Privilegie, mein größten Covid, zu haben nach Shmues mit unserer Gastheit, mit Mike Burstyn. It's really my great privilege and pleasure and honor to have this conversation with Mike Burstyn today. I have a little bit to tell you about him, and I have to say that we could spend the whole hour with my just telling you what his biography is, but we will leave some of this to Mike very soon. But I do want to say, by way of introduction, and many of you may already know this, that Mike was born to a famed family of actors, and he actually first walked onto a stage at the age of 3, which we'll hear a little bit about, more about in a little while. He has enjoyed a unique international career, entertaining audiences on stage, screen, and television, in nightclubs, and on concert stages throughout the world. And he is the recipient of a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Israeli Union of Performing Artists, for his lifelong contribution to the culture of Israeli stage and film. He is fluent in 8 languages and is the director of dubbing at Netflix. And he wrote and directed his award-winning Israeli feature film Azimuth, which commemorates the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War and is streaming on Amazon Prime. He stars in the hit Israeli TV series Judah on Hulu, in the Israeli feature film Happy Times, and in the English version of the Netflix hit Fauda. He recently starred as the patriarch of the multi-award-winning German TV series about 3 generations of a Jewish family in modern-day Germany, Die CIYCL. As if that's not enough, He starred on Broadway as P.T. Barnum in the Tony Award-winning musical Barnum. And other Broadway credits include starring as Mike Todd in the Broadway musical Ain't Broadway Grand, The Megillah, and Inquest, in which he was hissed and booed 8 times a week as Roy Cohn. He's received so many awards. Like I said, I could spend the next hour telling you what those are. But let me just mention that he received a Drama Desk Award in New York for his performance of the revival of the Rothschilds and on Second Avenue. And he also starred on Broadway, off Broadway and in LA as Meyer Lansky in Lansky. Many, many, many productions. I don't want to take too much time right now because I want to hear from Mike, but I just want to say that overseas, Mike has been one of Israel's all-time popular stars. He's the winner of 2 Israeli Oscars for his portrayal of Kuni Lemel, which is a kind of Forrest Gump. And from 1978 to 81, he hosted and starred in his own TV variety show in Israel and Holland, the MIKE BURSTYN Show, which was rated among the 10 most popular shows in the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And he recently completed shooting a new series for Israeli Hot TV called The Jewish Vampire. How do I know Mike? Well, aside from having a crush on him when I was a teenager, watching the Israeli film Kuni Lemel, which,
You
by the
never
way, is
told
based.
me that. You never told me that.
Now you know.
Oh,
The secret is out. But I actually got to meet Mike around the turn of this century when the Yiddish Institute was producing its annual Winter Yiddish Intensive, mostly at UCLA and at Skirball, which was called The Art of Yiddish. And I had learned how devoted Mike was to keeping Yiddish alive, and he graciously offered his immense talents to do a number of big fundraising shows for us. One was sharing the stage with the late, great CIYCL, and one, if you can believe it, performing virtually the entire Yiddish musical, The Megillah of Itzik Mangel, as a one-man show. That was absolutely extraordinary. And I know from these experiences that not only was he breithartig, generous with his time and talents, but that he had an extraordinarily unique life experience as a child of post-war Yiddish theater, and that he is, not surprising, a pleasure to listen to. But before we dig into a little bit more about those experiences with Yiddish theater, I just recently learned a new Yiddish word from you, Mike, which is verkalekt. Verkalekt. It's a word I never heard before. So can you explain to our audience what that is?
well, first of all, thank you for that lovely introduction. Are you sure that I accomplished all that in 45 years? That's unbelievable. How did I do all that?
Well,
It should
you
have taken,
started before you were born, right?
yeah, it should have taken at least 70 years, which it did. Uh, Thank you for
And
that
I know Hore, yeah.
lovely introduction. And now I know that you had a crush on me,
Yes.
and that changes the whole picture. Okay. We'll talk about that later. Uh, well, when we prepared for this interview, we were talking about my childhood in the Yiddish um, atmosphere, where I was born on the Lower East Side of New York on Second Avenue, and there was a very famous the Yiddish. Uh, Actors Union, which was called the Hebrew Actors Union, was the first performing artists union in America. It predates Equity and SAG and all the others. And there is a building that's still there on East 7th Street in Manhattan. We're hoping someday to turn it into a uh, museum of the Yiddish theater. And that's where all the actors and writers and musicians and composers and directors would gather on a daily basis. It was like their home, like, a club. There actually was a club on the second floor, and would exchange jokes and stories. And one of the things that I learned when I was like 3 years old was that they used to, especially the comedians, they would speak. They had their own kind of language, and they called it kalachen. I don't know where the root is from kalachen, but it basically meant double talk. And they would just, they and then from there it merged into kalachen or fakalacht, which it means you. And I learned it listening to them, and they would just talk these things, and they understood each other. And my father would say, Misha, de gedenkst, wenn de beholten vernette, ich bin nicht verchachte Bischkes, in Belopes in Nias, und dann bin ich gegangen in Fachlochsen, ich bedachtens. And that was kalachen. So when Miri and I started to talk, and I mentioned it, she had never heard that word. We're adding it to our dictionary of Yiddish. Um, what would we call it?
Yiddish news, Yiddish theater talk. Yeah,
Yeah,
Yiddish, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So it's called kalachen. You all now have a new word to insert in your funken wagglers, if you remember that.
Right. Yeah, yeah. There's a good administration, but yeah, unfortunately, only Yiddish speakers will understand how it works exactly, right? For everyone else's ears, it sounds like that's Yiddish, but it's
Exactly. But it's
yeah.
nonsensical. It's nonsense. But and when I was a little boy, I was 3 years old, my father, all my, like uncles and aunts, the great stars of the Yiddish theater, like, Maury Schwartz and Aaron Lebedoff and Moshe Oisher and Rezel Bozic, all these great stars. And they also used to come over to me when I was little and said, Matale, kalach a bissel, lass mich reden, kalach a bissel, and I would start kalaching. Ich bin gegangen, ich bin gegangen, begotten, bis jeden, bis gachten, benubens. So
So
that's how I
you
started my
started,
career.
yeah, you started young doing that, yeah.
Oh
And
yeah.
okay, so tell us how did you get your start on the stage?
Well, look, I was born into, as you said, my parents were two of the greatest stars of the Yiddish theater. And so my sister and I have a twin sister. We were born Motele and Zisele was our names. And we grew up with this wonderful atmosphere of Yiddish theater on the Lower East Side. And when I was 3 years old, I used to, at home, I would listen to my father's Yiddish recordings. My father recorded for Columbia. In those days, they recorded ethnic songs like Yiddish, Italian, the old 78s. And so I would listen to my father's records at home. And I knew them all by heart. When I was about 3 years old, the story goes that I came to visit backstage at the National Theater on Houston Street. And my father and mother, they were performing a musical, and it was around Christmas time. And it was a matinee, and my our au pair, the woman who was taking care of us, decided to bring us in the afternoon, and so we came and we were standing backstage watching my parents perform. My father was singing one of his couplets, one of his songs, and his friends, the other actors backstage, they said to me, "Motale, you want to go to Daddy?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So they put a cylinder, a top hat on my head and a beard with like a rubber band. They attached it, the beard and a top hat. And they said, go ahead. So I walked out on stage. My father was singing, and the audience started to laugh. And he couldn't figure out why they were laughing. They thought maybe he forgot to zip up his fly. And as he was singing, the orchestra leader in the pit was motioning to my father, look to your left, you know. His name was Manny Fleischman, was the orchestra leader. Now, it's strange that I can remember names from 70 years ago, but I can't remember what happened yesterday. But that's normal. So Manny Fleischman pointed to me, and my father just stopped singing, and he called me over. And he said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm Santa Claus." And he said, "Oh, Santa Claus, what are you doing here, Santa Claus?" I said, "I want to sing." He said, "Oh, you want to sing? Okay, what do you want to sing?" And I blurted out one of my father's famous songs, Hotza Mama Pir Batzotza, which is again like Kalach, the gibberish. And he said, "Well, go ahead." And my father said, "Well, accompany him." And Manny said, "Okay." So they started playing a little music, and I started singing. That's what my father used to sing. And I took a bow and I ran off. And the audience went wild. And I had to come back out, took another Shakespearean bow, and there was a gentleman, so they tell me, in the first row, who got up and threw a silver dollar on stage, and he yelled out, "Yingele, haltus amovis design as a grois vidantate." Well, keep this because someday you'll be as great as your father. And that is the history, as far as I know. I remember, maybe I remember it, but that's how I started my career. That was in 1948. Believe it or
Yeah,
not.
so it's in your blood. Yeah,
Yeah,
in your
it
blood.
really was. I mean,
Yeah.
I believe that it's genetic. My father came from a line of cantors, and he grew up in. He was born in Warsaw, but grew up in Berdyansk, which is now Ukraine. And at the age of 14 or 15, he decided he wanted to be an actor, and he ran away from home and became a Yiddish star. And unfortunately, he never saw his father again, and eventually came to the United States in 1923. He was brought over by Tomaszewski, had heard of him, and became a great star all over the world. Then he met my mother years later. She was a young Yiddish actress. She worked with Maury Schwartz. He had a children's company called Boom and Redel, and they met and married and were partners in life and on stage for almost 50 years.
So yeah, so in case people didn't catch the name, so we're talking about Pesach'ke Fishman and Lillian.
Burstein,
Sorry, Burstein, sorry,
yeah,
Fishman, Burstein and Lillian Lutz.
and
Yeah,
Lillian Lott.
Pesach'ke Burstein and Lillian
Lillian,
Lutz. Yeah, yeah.
exactly. And so, you know, it was in my DNA, and I loved it. And then, starting very early in 1952, my parents, every year, they would fly to South America for a season of Yiddish theater. Uh, it was summer in New York, and so winter in Argentina and Chile and Brazil. And so they would fly down with other very famous Yiddish stars like Joseph Buloff would go down there as well, uh, Jacob Benami, and perform a season of Yiddish theater. And up until that, we were about 7 years old, we stayed home with my grandparents. But in 1952, they decided they want to keep the family together. And so they took my sister and myself along with them to a season in South America. And that's really where I started, I'd say professionally at the age of 7, performing, my sister and I performing with my parents. That's where I also learned Yiddish to begin with. We went to a Yiddish school, the Yud Lamed Peretz Schule, because in those days it was very early on since the establishment of the state of Israel. And so the Jewish schools around the world didn't teach Hebrew that much. The Jewish schools, especially in South America, they taught Yiddish. Like in Montreal, in Canada, it was usually Yiddish. So half a day Spanish, half a day Yiddish. That's how I started learning my Yiddish. and eventually performed together with my parents. Actually, I can show you if I can do this.
Please. Yeah.
I'm able to do this. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to share some things with you. Okay. Let's see. I hope you can see these things. Can you see that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Beautiful.
That is what they call, eventually we were called the Four Bursteins. This is from one of my father's famous uh, musicals, The Comediant. And that's me, my sister, my parents. Then I'll show you another one. This was when my sister and I had our birthday in 1953. And it was a gift that was given, it says at the bottom, a Präsent von Mottele und Sisele Burstein zu sehr 8-jährigen Geburtstag, a present to the public of Mottele and Sisele on their 8th birthday. And right there, I even autographed it, Mottele Burstein. That's me. Okay. Then we have another one. This was again on stage, and we were two little Hasidim, and we would sing together. I think this was a song, a Gebirtig song called Avremele in Yosele. Avremele in Yosele. And then I can show you some other photos of the family. Let's see if I find them here. Should be here. Yep. Okay, this was, okay, that is one of the um, musicals that my parents performed. And again, that's the two of us. See, my father realized early on that the two of us were a great asset to the company, because Yiddish audiences were not used to seeing children in a Yiddish musical, and
Right.
we were fluent in Yiddish, and so it was a novelty. And at that moment, it became more and more. He used to write us into the different plays and musicals, and this was one where my parents were the bride and groom. Let's see if I think that's about, well, eventually, we'll talk about it later, but it went all the way up to the 1960s when we came to Israel, and the last show that I did with them together in Yiddish was the Megillah of Itzik Manger, and we can talk
Yeah.
about that later.
Yeah. Yeah. But, I just wanted to say that it was not only a novelty to see children performing in Yiddish on stage, but, it was even a novelty for children to be in the audience. At least when I went to Yiddish theater in New York, there I was like the only child. It was a big deal. Sad to say, right? That's zum Bedauern.
Yeah, but it was different in Europe when we first came in 1953, 54, after Argentina. We traveled to France, and for 6 months we performed Yiddish
Mhm.
theater in Paris. And we then were joined, well, first of all, in Argentina, we were joined by many of the actors who had survived the Holocaust, who had worked with my father before the war in Poland. And when the war was over, they immigrated and they were allowed to come to Argentina, Chile, Uruguay. At that time, Juan Perón, who was the dictator, the United States wasn't so keen on letting Holocaust survivors come over, but Argentina did. They let him come and become citizens. At the same time, he also allowed a lot of Nazis to come in, but he
Right.
was an
Yeah.
he was
Yeah.
an equal opportunity,
Yes.
dictator. So the actors that we worked with in Argentina and later in France as well, they were actors.
And Belgium too. Yes, you were in
Oh, yes,
Belgium.
absolutely. In Brussels, I remember coming to Brussels and Antwerp. And so my father reunited with all these wonderful actors that he had worked with in the past. And that generation, their children and grandchildren were already part of the Yiddish language, the Yiddish culture. So it was a little more common to see young people in the theaters in South America, in Europe, in Israel,
Yeah.
but not so much in the United States.
So can you tell us who were some of the actors that you're referring to that managed to survive the Holocaust?
Well, in Argentina, I remember they then formed the Yiddish Actors Union in Argentina, and there were like Maurer was one of them, the family Maurer. There was Fellbaum, Narepkin, Stramer. These were all. They were then the managers and the producers in South America as well. In Israel, we met up with friends that had worked with my father before, like Lola Yakubovich. Uh, um, I'm trying to remember all the names, but there were, a cadre of wonderful Yiddish professional actors who managed to survive. Many of them, unfortunately, who didn't. My father eventually found out that some of his best friends had not made it, had not survived. But I remember them very fondly because they embodied that tradition of Yiddish theater that was almost destroyed during the Holocaust. Eventually, later on, I was able to work with one of the greatest actors, managers, not just of the Yiddish theater, but of his generation, and that was with Maury Schwartz. And we can talk about that a little later.
Yes. But so before we get to Maurice Schwartz, you were already performing Yiddish theater in Israel in the 1950s as well, yeah?
Yep.
What was that like, that atmosphere? Was it still kind of friendly to having Yiddish happening, or was there already the beginning of some issues, to put it
Well,
mildly?
not the beginning, it had already started. We came in 1954 and we started performing my father's repertoire of Yiddish theater. And at the time, so many of the survivors that had managed to come to Israel, they were hingerig, they were hungry for some entertainment, Yiddish entertainment. They even remembered the shows that my father had done before the war. But unfortunately, the leadership at the time had made the decision that Hebrew had to become the national language. Anything that had to do with the diaspora and with the Shoah should be set aside. It was a big mistake. Later, it was they realized the mistake, but at the time in the early 50s, there was a tendency to shun Yiddish, the language, and certainly Yiddish performances. And so there were both technical and legal issues that were put upon performing in Yiddish theater. For example, there was an extra tax for every ticket that was sold
Wow.
to a performance in a foreign language, and Yiddish was categorized as a foreign language. So anyone coming to see the Yiddish theater, it costs more to buy a ticket. There would be demonstrations sometimes when we performed in different venues around the country. At one time, I remember there were windows that were, they threw rocks and shattered windows, and the idea was medabrim ivrit, we only speak. And so eventually, after about a year and a half, my father realized that me willens nicht, they're trying to push us aside. And so he said, you know what, we can't, survive here. And we moved back to New York for several years until the early 60s. But that was a problem at the time. And ironically, those leaders of the country at the time, like Ben Gurion and Eshkol, and they all spoke Yiddish at home uh, and between themselves. But they had this vision, and that's the way they figured the best way is to make Yiddish the Stiefkind, the stepchild. That changed, and we can talk about it a little later on, in 1965 with an epic, historic musical that we did called The Megillah of Itzik Monger. And that changed the attitude and the formal and official attitude towards Yiddish in Israel.
Yeah, it has many reverberations. So we'll definitely come back to that one. But you mentioned, so you were in between, you went back to New York, uh, and from Israel, and you had a chance then to meet and work with the great Maury Schwartz. Maury Schwartz, the actor, impresario, theater director, movie director, all of those things. Yeah. So you had a chance to work with him. So tell us about that a little bit.
Well, I was about to have my bar mitzvah, and my father got a call that Maury Schwartz, the great Maury Schwartz, was about to change his repertoire a little bit to modernize it. He had established the Yiddish Art Theater in New York in the 1920s, and had become very famous, not just in Yiddish circles, but people came from all over to watch his performance, his productions, of Shalom Aleichem, and um, there are pictures of him with Albert Einstein and with Charlie Chaplin, and they came to see this great talent. And he was about to produce a modern comedy called Come Blow Your Horn. And it was a Yiddish adaptation. And he was looking for a little boy to play the role of the son. And somebody recommended that there's a kid that could do it. And I was informed that we're going to meet Maury Schwartz at his home in New York, his apartment. And it was like you tell me, I'm going to meet God, because Maury Schwartz was, Laurence Olivier, John Gielgud, one of the greatest. And I came very nervous, but I found, and eventually we became very close, that the greater the artist is, the more humble and approachable they are in person. They don't have anything to prove. They are just so amazingly simple and nice. And so when I got there and we started talking, my fear kind of, dissipated, and he hired me. And this was on Second Avenue in 1958. And we have a little, I think I sent you a little clipping from the forwards that we can,
Right. And
uh,
yeah,
and it was very successful, and certainly something completely different than Schwartz was accustomed to. It was the Anderson Theater on Second Avenue. And as a result of that, for the next few years, okay, we're going to see uh, my family. There it is. We can see that. That's Schwartz. That's me. That's on the left is Rosetta Bialis, a wonderful actress. Muni Serebrov on the right. I believe that, yeah. I don't remember the name of the actress, unfortunately. It may be at the bottom. We may be able to see it. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there we go. Muni Serebrov. I was right. Freda Lelifshitz, Rosetta Bialis, in a Szene von der Komödie A Lochenkopf. Which is, yeah, a hole in the head was a Lochenkopf, was wird aufgeführt in Anderson Theater. That's a,
but I noticed, Mike, they put it's pay Burshtyn. Yeah.
let's see. Oh, that's a mistake. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Schwartz Hey Bursty. No, that's wrong. Huh? You got that? Yeah. It's not
Yeah.
Burstyn, it's Burstyn. That's
MIKE Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
me. And as a
that's
result of this, we then went and performed with Schwartz for the next year or two in his repertoire. And especially, we toured in Canada, in Montreal. We did two plays in Montreal in 1958. It was Shweze Sein Ayid, Hard to Be a Jew, and Tevye the Milichika, Tevye the Milkman, the basis for Fiddler on the Roof. And
right.
I got to work with him. He taught me much of the technicalities of producing a play, directing a play. I watched him. He was just a natural talent. I learned many things from him as far as acting, speaking, projecting on stage. You know, he taught me that as an actor, you have to project so that people at the back of the auditorium can hear you without a microphone. We didn't work microphones in those days. It all came, he said, from the diaphragm. It all comes from the bottom, and that's been a lesson my whole life. You know that his what he instilled in me, and you can see it. I did do shoot, and I started filming with an eight millimeter camera in those days. It was not it was color but no sound, and miraculously I was able to digitize a little clip from Shweze Sein Ayid on stage. I played Syomka, and you can see Schwartz. And by the way, anyone who hasn't watched one of his movies, I highly recommend either Tevye or Uncle Moses, and you'll see one of the great um, actors of all time
Yeah, I
in
totally.
Yiddish, but the language wasn't, there was no different in just because he was speaking Yiddish, it was phenomenal. Do
I
you have
agree with
that
you
clip?
completely. I
Yeah,
do. I'm about to show it. Um,
there it is. And that's my mother
Sorry,
on
sorry.
stage, 1959. Yeah,
Oops, something just happened. Ay, ay, ay. Um,
it was there
uh,
a minute ago.
yeah, I had it a moment ago and now it's not playing.
Well,
So hold
maybe
on a second.
turn it
Hold
off
on a
and
second.
turn it on
Yep,
again.
yep.
You know,
New
we have
Technique.
80, we have 80 participants. Do you know that?
That that is great.
Yeah.
I don't know why the media player. So let me get out of this and open it up again. Okay. Um,
I have faith in you.
okay, let me around that said. What is this?
While you're looking, I should also mention his daughter, Frances,
Okay.
who
Yeah.
also started performing. Wonderful actress. She and her brother Marvin were adopted by the Schwartzes after the war in Belgium. They were visiting an orphan home and wanted to adopt. They didn't have children. They wanted to adopt a little girl and sorry, a little boy, and they came to the orphanage. I believe it was in Brussels, and they decided on Marvin, this little kid that had survived, and he was an orphan. And they said, we'd like to adopt him. And Marvin immediately said, I will not go without my sister. And they said, but we only want one child. He said, no, 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 I'm not going without my sister, his little sister who had survived with him. And that was Frances, his sister. And the Schwartzes said, okay. So they took them both and brought them back to New York and raised them. And I never forget one day we came to at a early morning to visit Schwartz at the apartment, and we found him standing in the kitchen squeezing oranges so that the children should have orange juice when they went to school. The great Maury Schwartz squeezing oranges. Tells you something.
Absolutely.
There it is. That's him.
Okay, here's
That's
the
Francis on the left. That's his daughter on the left, and that's my mother on the right.
und bald kommst du herein.
Yeah. That's me. There I am. Sionka.
It's great that you have this.
Oh my God, it's amazing that I
Yeah,
found it and that I was able to digitize it.
yeah. And there we have the Shabbos. There's almost every piece has to have some candle lighting. Yeah.
Yes. And actually, my father comes in here as, and my sister, they were uh, statistim. You know, they were part of the crowd coming, guests coming in. Let's see. Should be right away. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of that actor. Okay, there it is. That's my sister right there coming in and walking away. And my father is right there. He's saying hello to Schwartz. So the whole family was, our families became very close, which was, and that's Marvin sitting down next to my father. That was the son. It's
That's great.
really is
Okay.
something special.
Yeah. Okay. Sehr gut. All right. So, nu, wollen wir gehen weiter, ja? Und Megillah. Nu, wollen wir
Yeah,
kommen zu der
well,
Megillah.
in
So,
the 19,
nachdem, after this was New York, you went back to Israel, yeah?
yes, 1962, we were finally brought back to Israel. And between 62 and 65, we performed 12 of my father's musicals, all the famous musicals that the audiences remembered from before the war. Among them was a Chassan in Shtetl, a wedding in a village wedding that my father was very famous for, and something very moving happened. Actually, my mother tells this story in the Comediant. There is a wonderful documentary that was produced in Israel about my family. It's called the Comediant, and
It is wonderful. I can attest to that.
yeah,
It's
it's been,
fantastic.
it's been out. It's won awards. It won the Israeli Oscar. And one of the anecdotes is while we were in 1962 or 63, we were performing a Chassan Shtetl. A Chassan Shtetl was for the Yiddish speaking audiences in Europe and Poland, like Fiddler on the Roof was here on Broadway. It was a great musical. And the music was so famous, like Sunrise Sunset. Uh, my father's musical had a wonderful melody. It was a Hasidic melody called Oy vey tate. Oy vey tate, lebe dike futa. Everybody in Warsaw, in Poland, knew this musical. And we were performing it in Tel Aviv. And my mother tells a story that just before the beginning, just before we started, a young man came backstage and said, Adon Burstein, I have to tell you something. My wife is just about to give birth, so I can't stay for the opening for the show. But I have to tell you that uh, I was in Auschwitz, and people went to the gas chambers singing. It's hard to recall, but singing your music from a Chassan Shtetl, because my father and mother were lucky to escape at the end of September, they were able to leave Poland on the last ship, the Pilsudski, to leave before the Nazis invaded. So they were saved. But he said this was very soon after a year or two, and they still remembered the songs, and they were singing on their way to the gas chambers, Oy vey tate, lebe foot. So
Yeah.
it was more than just coming back and performing for these survivors that had come to Israel after the war. It brought back their memories and their homes and what they had, remembered. And so for those couple of years, we were performing the usual repertoire that my father had done. In 1965, we were approached by a producer, Yankele Agamon, and two of the greatest writers and poets in Israel, Chaim Hefer and Dan Ben Amotz, and the musician, the composer, Dubi Zeltzer, and the director was Shmuel Bunim from the Comrie Theater, and they were about to produce a musical version of Itzik Manger's Megillah Lieder. Manger, the great Itzik Manger, the songs of the Megillah. And they were looking for actors that could portray these different characters. They had done little rehearsals with some Habima actors because they figured Habima actors could maybe speak Yiddish. And the director, Bonim, just said, no, it's not the same. It's just not right. We need actors who come from the Yiddish stage. And someone recommended that they come and see us, and they did. And we were hired, make a long story short, and we rehearsed this amazing musical. The music was composed by Dubi, and each Manger's poem was set to music. And Chaim Hefer wrote narration for each scene in Hebrew, and we produced it in 1965 at a Schwitzbud in Yafo. It was actually a hammam, it was a Turkish bath that was converted into a theater. And the rest is history, because it created a sensation in Israel. I actually, lately, I found something I have to show you. This is a newspaper, Ma'ariv, that I found. Let's see if I can show it. Oh boy. No, it's hard to see. Here it is. There it is. From 1965. Tzchok umetat Zadigma. It's the Megillah leader, and it was a rave review, just a rave review. And from the moment that we opened, and we brought Manger over from the United States, because basically he was living in New York and had almost been forgotten. And he wasn't very well, but we brought him for the opening, and it became the biggest sensation for the not just Yiddish, but the Israeli theater. There was an international convention of theater, and people came directors from all over the world, and we were voted the Megillah as the best production in Israel. And since then,
Amazing.
it set the tone and the stage for the acceptance and how would I say, bringing back that and correcting the mistake that was made in the 50s of trying to push Yiddish aside. And since then, we did many Yiddish productions. A Yiddish theater was established in Israel. I did several productions there. And Yiddish is now considered an official language in Israel. And I remember the first, after the Megillah, the Ministry of Education started offering Yiddish as one of the extra courses for high schools. And I was invited to the Gimnasia Herzliya, one of the high schools in Tel Aviv, where they inaugurated the first Yiddish program. And interestingly enough, the majority of the students that had enrolled were Sephardic kids and not Ashkenazi.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, the Ashkenazi were fed this kind of, what should we say, this a little bit of yeah, about Yiddish, that Yiddish wasn't worth pursuing, that Yiddish was, worse than the jargon. Yeah, it was something that really needed to be left behind.
And as a matter of fact, the Megillah in 1969, three producers in New York decided to bring us to Broadway. And we were the first Yiddish production to open on Broadway in 1969 at the Golden Theater and received rave reviews.
It's fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. But something changed for you, right? After that great success with Yiddish theater. So tell us a little bit what happened.
Well, after the Megillah, you know what? If you give me 1 second, I want to find what I was looking for. Hold on, don't go away, okay? Talk to them a little bit about me, okay? Miri, tell them
Sure.
something else that you know.
Right. Something else that I know. So, well, I mentioned before, so now we've been hearing about the Megillah, and that obviously his whole family performed in this show, and all of the poems of Itzik Manga were set to music, and it was just so very beautiful. Itzik Manga was wrote tongue in cheek, so there was a lot of humor in it, but also commentary about the human condition. And so these songs and poems are wonderful. And Mike, for us, did the Ganze Megillah, as we say, the entire Megillah, as a one-man show
I found
for
it.
CIYCL. Yeah, which
Sorry.
is extraordinary. Yeah.
Sorry, I found it because
Good.
important. Just a minute. Where is it? Come on. I thought I found it and now I've lost it. I wanted to show you the, well, I'll look for, I'm sorry. I'll look for it again.
Is it an image from the Megillah?
It's an image, yeah. An image from
I
the,
think I may have that.
okay.
Um, yeah.
Oh, here it is. Just a minute. Here it is. And what I have to do is share again. Okay, there it is. I did find it. This is the Megillah. And that's the original poster at the Hammam. At that time, it was MIKE BURSTYN. We were 150 performances by then. We took it to South America. There was a revival later on, but it changed the attitude towards Yiddish in Israel. And as a result of this, one of the performances in 1965, I was visited backstage by an Israeli film producer named Mordechai Navon and a director named Israel Becker, okay? And they came backstage because one of their friends, the great painter Bergman, Yossel Bergman, he was the son of Melech Ravitch, who was also a great writer and poet who lived in Canada. I'm sure many of you may remember him. And they were looking for an actor to portray the double role in the new musical Technicolor film that they were about to produce of the Shnei Kunilemo. And somebody recommended me. And that changed my life, changed my career, because I had to portray the both. Well, the Shnei Kunilemo was one of the great original musicals that was written by Avram Goldfaden, the father of modern Yiddish theater. He lived in Iasi in Romania, and they used to perform in a wine cellar. And he composed and wrote several historical musicals, Bar Kochba and Shulamit. But he also did an adaptation, basically a Yiddish version of Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors. And it was in a little shtetl, and it was the story of Kuni Lemel, who is a little bit like you mentioned before, like a Jewish Forrest Gump, very sweet Hasidic kid who has a few problems. He's a little blind in one eye, he limps on one leg, and he stutters. But other than that, he's fine. But those are his problems, and he is being married off to the butcher in the next shtetl, who is a very rich butcher, and they want to marry him. The butcher wants to marry his daughter off because Kuni Lemel comes from a very prestigious family. The problem is that the daughter is in love with Max, who is a student, non-religious, but he could be the spitting image of Kuni Lemel. And
Right. So
so,
this was a tour de force on your part,
yeah,
playing two roles completely different. Yeah.
exactly, and they needed an actor that could embody and could perform, both the Schlemiel and the leading man. And they came to see the Megillah, and they chose me, and that changed my life because it was the first Israeli film in CinemaScope, Technicolor, musical. The music we recorded with the Israel Philharmonic, and it came out in 1966, July 1st, on my birthday. And since then, it's been 60 years. We did two sequels, Kuni Lemel in Tel Aviv, Kuni Lemel in Cairo. Oh, wait a minute, I got a picture of it. Hold on. Hey, technology, folks. This is important.
It's
Let's,
a gorgeous, gorgeous movie.
yeah, let's see. Now that we saw already, but let's see, here he is. Okay, okay. I'm, I can, I can work as a Zoom. There he is. Uh, this is Kuni Lemel in Tel Aviv. That was a sequel in 1976, and then we did one in 1982, Kuni Lemel in Cairo. But that's Kuni Lemel. And from the moment the film came out, I was already Mike Burstyn, not Motale, and became famous throughout Israel, not as a Yiddish performer, but as an Israeli star. And it has, it epitomized me then and to this very day, after, two, three generations, wherever I meet an Israeli, they'll say Koni Lamo. That's followed me forever. And I think it's a great compliment, after all these
It
years.
it is. It is. It was wonderful. Yeah, it was clear why I fell in love. Um, so we really must stop and give people a chance to ask some questions, before we sign off. Uh, but I know, obviously your career just took off in all directions from that moment. Uh, in international acclaim, and of course Israeli fame that had nothing to do with Yiddish whatsoever. But just I know that you've always returned to your roots. It's always been a mission of yours to safeguard and promulgate Yiddish theater as much as possible. And before we finish this part of our Shmues, maybe you can tell us what is happening with the Hebrew Actors Union. What's your role in that? What's your vision for that?
I promised my parents and my, friends, all the actors that I knew growing up, that, if it's Menashe Skolnick or Molly Picon or Moshe Oisher or Jenny Goldstein, they were great, great, great stars. And I don't want them to be forgotten, as well as what they accomplished in the Yiddish theater. They were so influential on the American Jewish experience, the immigrants that came at the beginning of the previous century and worked in the sweatshops and worked hard all week. And at the end of the week, the only outlet they had for their daily, drudgery and suffering was going to the Yiddish theater. And so I want to, commemorate that and memorialize it. Jenny Goldstein, for example, there's a famous story that there was one man that sent two of his children to university thanks to Jenny Goldstein, because he sold handkerchiefs at the end of each performance. And because people came out, crying, and he made a lot of money selling handkerchiefs. So we have the building. We are a foundation now. The union doesn't work as a union, and we're trying to raise the funds to establish, to renovate it and create a museum. And I was very lucky. I met in Berlin when we were doing the TV series. I met the wonderful architect Daniel Liebeskind, and Daniel is a Yiddishist, and we sat and talked. I told him about this, and he has volunteered that if we get it together, he will design the museum for us. So that's my next project, to immortalize the actors and the culture, and it's where it actually took place on 7th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenues.
Fantastic. So herzlichen Dank dir, Mike. And I have to turn over my questions to other people right now. Do we have questions, Vivian?
Ja, ich habe gewollt sagen, euch
Yeah.
herzlichen Dank. And I feel like we really need to have a part two, because
Yes.
it sort of stopped in
I
the
know,
middle.
I know.
And I have this feeling that you have so much more to say and so much more to tell us, that I really do think that we'd love to have you back, and maybe we can arrange that.
Well, Vivian, I'll tell you, just to come full circle, and we can do that as the next time. I just finished performing in as Miri said, in Die Zweiflers, which is a German television production about a Holocaust survivor who came out as a child of Auschwitz and came to Frankfurt, and over the decades created a modern family and a business. And the most important thing about it is that most of what he speaks German in the series, but he and his wife only speaks Yiddish. And as a result, this has been a mirror for the German public. They have really the results have been fantastic. We've won awards. We won the Cannes Television Festival Award. We've won German awards, and it's become a huge hit in Germany. And I think that may be one of the venues we can use to maintain what our motivation is, and that is that Yiddish, my motivation, Yiddish continues as a spoken language because it's taught in universities and schools. But I'm like that last link in the Golden Gate, because I was old enough to experience these wonderful actors myself, and I'm not old enough that I cannot transmit it to this generation. So that's one of my most important goals.
Well, we'd love to
I
have you
just,
back. As you saw, we reach a large audience, not just with this program, but this the event will be on YouTube. People will be able to watch it afterwards, and it will reach a very large audience. But I just wanted to mention just quickly about Yossel. You mentioned Yossel Bergner, the
Yeah.
son of Melech Robert. So I just wanted to give the correct name because he was a very important Jewish artist.
One of the greatest, and Yosele and I always spoke Yiddish. We never, he lived in Israel. We never spoke Hebrew together, only Yiddish.
Right, right. So, Miri, I'll let
and
you go to some of these questions.
yeah, I just, one important thing, Shane Baker of the Kulturkongress in New York mentions that there is a recent version of the Megillah that Mike directed, and it's during the pandemic as a video with English subtitles, and it's in the Q&A. Shane has given us the link to that YouTube. So it's not the musical, but it's Mangel's text, which is quite special, quite wonderful. I agree
And I
completely.
want to give
It's
I want to give kudos to Shane because he is one of our partners in continuing the effort to have Yiddish continue as a a, a, a spoken language and an entertaining language. The entertainment part of Yiddish is so important. So thank you, Shane.
yes, absolutely. Okay, so do we have a few minutes for some questions? Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, So, one question from Helen Silverman. Where did you perform in Paris in the 50s? Was it the theater or the cabaret?
No, it was theater.
Mhm.
Uh, I believe the actor was Zalman Koleshnikov. Ooh, oh my God, how I can remember things all of a sudden. Crazy. Koleshnikov was one of the actors there who led the Yiddish actors. I remember that years later, I performed at Salle Player in Paris. But in the 50s, I don't remember what theater it was, but it was definitely theater, not cabaret.
Great. And I think you touched upon this already, but Henry Slutsky asks about your, please recounting the story of your parents touring Europe in the late 30s and returning to New York on the last ship before the war. And of course, this is before you were born. But can you fill us in a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Actually, I have. I'm going to see if I have it here. Yes, I do. My parents were very fortunate. In 1939, they had just finished a season of Yiddish theater, and it was about time to, to go back to New York because my father, as a naturalized American citizen in those days, you had to be physically present back in the United States every 5 years to renew your passport. That's changed since then, but it was October, and my mother said, let's go back because there are rumors going on right now that something might happen. The war clouds were hanging, and my father said, no, I can't go because we just finished, one season, and the company is ready to go, and we'll get ready to start another season in November. And my mother was smart enough to drag him to the United States consulate in Warsaw, and they were met by a young consul who, as luck would have it, recognized my father. And he said, Mr. Burstyn, I was a young student in New York, and in order to make ends meet, I was an usher in the Yiddish theater in Brooklyn, and I saw you. So I would advise you to listen to your wife. Why don't you go back? If nothing happens, you'll come back. But so they bought tickets to leave and leave Gdynia, the port at the time. But when they came to the port, they had tickets, but there was no place. The last ship that was leaving was the Pilsudski. And as a matter of fact, this is the Pilsudski. This is a
Wow.
souvenir
Mm.
that my father brought back from this ship. And this Pilsudski, he had sailed many times on it, coming from New York to Warsaw, to Poland. But at the port, they met the chief purser. And he said, "What are you doing here, Mr. Burstyn?" He said, "Well, we don't have a cabin, but we have tickets." He said, "Don't worry, I'll give you my cabin and I will bunk with somebody else." That was the way they were able to get on the ship. The ship left Gdynia on the 29th or the 30th of October. And what happened on the 1st of November, everybody knows. So luckily, that's how my parents were able to survive. Otherwise, they would have been stuck there and American passport, no American passport, I wouldn't be here today.
Muzzle, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jonathan Solomon, that you're here. And so Zisha Carlo asks actually a question that I was hoping you would get to also. Uh, uh, about apparently she worked with Leon Liebgold and or sorry, he and Mina Bern and Schiffer and Kennst du reden a bissl wegen sie. These are the great, wonderful actors that I knew, that I saw in Yiddish theater as well in New York.
Oh my
And
God.
and of course Leon Liebgold, the great star of Yiddish cinema. So kennst du a bissl reden wegen dem?
Of
Can you tell us a
course.
little bit about that?
By the way, the Pilsudski, it was the last voyage of the Pilsudski when they got to New York. On the way back, it was sunk by a German U-boat. So that was the last voyage of the Pilsudski. You're talking about Leon Liebgold and Liliana, his wife, Lonik, as we called him. Great stars, great couple. There were great couples of uh, uh, Yiddish couples that had married and were partners on stage. There was Razel and Bozic and Mina Byrne and Mina and her husband. Um, oh, come on.
Ben Bonus?
Ben
Was it
Bonus.
Ben
Thank you.
Bonus?
Thank you. Thank you. These were not just friends, they were family. Leon Liebgold and Liliana were famous for the Grinefelder, some of the Yiddish films that were done before the war.
For Der Dybbuk, for
Well,
Der
the
Dybbuk.
Dybbuk as well, but they also did
Yeah.
Grinefelder.
Hmm?
And she was in the Dybbuk. They were both in the Dybbuk, the famous
Hmm.
Yiddish version of the Dybbuk.
Hmm.
Mina was lucky to escape and spend time in the Far East during the war, and eventually came to Israel after the war and became very famous as a cabaret singer in Israel before she went back to New York. Razel and Max Bozic were great friends. Shifra Lehrer, the Lehrer sisters, I first met in South America, in Argentina. Uh, so these were, gosh, if you compared them today, probably to some of the wonderful uh, stable performers uh, on television series today. They were mainstays of the Yiddish theater.
Yeah. I think we have time for maybe just one more question, right? Uh, I know you guys tell me. We could be doing this for a long time.
Well, let's take
With
one more and then
one more. Okay,
we'll have
so
to, yeah.
yeah. So Karen Goodman asks, Karen Goodman, a wonderful dancer, choreographer, filmmaker, did you ever meet Judith Berg, who worked with Pesach in Poland and was choreographer for the film The Dybbuk, and her husband, Felix Fibish? Did you
Oh,
ever meet
wow.
them?
Of
Yeah?
course, of course. Well, Felix more than Judith because when I finally met them, I ran into Felix a lot more than I did to her. But Felix was also one of the members of our board of directors of the Hebrew Actors Union. Wonderful, uh, wonderful human being, a wonderful person, and a great talent. There were, that's interesting that you mentioned choreographers. There were several wonderful choreographers in the Yiddish theater, not to mention set designers, musicians, composers, the greats like Olshanetsky and Rumshinsky and my God, and Abe Elstein.
Yeah.
There's so much to talk about. I think, Vivian, we should do a an interview part two because we don't have
Yes.
enough time to get into, all these, and then I'll remember things that, once you start talking, other things come up.
Well, we will definitely try to set that up because, as you said, you are a real link to the past.
Yeah.
And that's so important that to make us aware of all about the world of Yiddish that we really never experienced. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. This has been a fantastic, fantastic interview. It was just wonderful. Thank you, Miri. This was
Thank
just
you.
great.
Thank you.
And
Motele, du bist ein Oizer.
Thank you for doing this. And really, if we don't do it, who will? I mean, it's like there was a documentary once called I Was There. Well, I was there, and it's my pleasure and my obligation to carry it on and make sure that these people, are this whole culture and of course there are books that have been written about it, and there's the lexicon that you can find, but that's pretty, academic. I want to,
Yeah.
make it alive because they were real people. And by the way, every year in September we go and honor them at the cemetery in on Long Island. There is a cemetery for the Yiddish actors Verein, and they're all there. Every time I go, I find all my friends are there, including my dear friend Bruce Adler, who unfortunately we love. We grew up together. His parents were the great stars, also Henrietta Jacobson and Julius Adler, and Bruce was 6 months older than me. We lost him several years ago, unfortunately, but it's our obligation to carry on so that we don't forget and we're not indifferent, like Elie Wiesel said.
Beautifully said.
okay,
Mike,
großen Dank und
thank you. Yeah.
auf Wiedersehen. Wir dürfen es tun noch einmal.
Mit Vergnügen.
Okay, es ist
And
It was a real honor and a pleasure to have you here with us
Thank you.
today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Danke, danke. Sei gesund alle.
Sei gesund.